morning, everybody, and how are we all doing today? It is Sunday, the 14th of July, 2024. And coming up today, I want to find out your tips on what you would do if you were to start an allotment once again. Or if you've got a new allotment, what would you do? This is kind of geared up to, well, share a few tips with people who might just be starting out on their first allotment. And I know we've got a few in the audience tonight. There could be more in the background or coming along later on as well. Now, of course, this is the pre-match warm-up as well. England, good luck to this evening. They start at 8 o'clock. We will be finished before then, of course. But before we get into that, let's see if we've got anybody out there. And straight away, Ballycillian Allotment Man, good evening to everyone. Good evening to you. We've got Adrian is there saying hello to Richard and all. Good evening to you. Kate is there saying good evening, Veg Army. Good evening to you. Seed to Table Plot 13. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to you. Turbo Streamers there. Good evening, Veg Podcasters. Good evening to you. Jenny Hallett, hello everyone. Good evening to you. Hargrave Gas is there. Evening all. Hope you've had a great week. So much to do, so little time. Tell me about it. Tell me about it. Jenny is there. I'm here, but can't type for a few minutes. Not a problem. Not a problem. Stuart Jackson, evening, Richard and the Veg Army. First, thank you for all the advice this week. That's what I love about the group. Everyone is always willing to help. Indeed, indeed. Over on Instagram, the Bearded Growers have joined. Hello, how are you doing? We have got Allotted Chef saying evening all. Richard Golding, hello all. Lovely to meet you today. And thank you so much for the tumbler composter. Very much appreciated. Digwell, hi all, good evening to you. He hasn't done any funny language for a while. He's obviously not trying to culture us so much anymore. Idaho Garden Girl, hello Richard and everybody in the chat. Good evening to you. Chilly Kate, hello from sunny Cornwall. How lovely. How lovely to get some sun, of course, that is too. Adrian is saying hello to Idaho. Rebecca, good evening, everyone. Good evening to you. Graham there, good evening, everyone. Good evening to you. Idaho says hi to Adrian. Anna Jones, good evening, gardeners. Indeed, good evening. It's a quick check on the Instagram. Looking forward to the JJ model. Indeed, indeed. So, tonight's conversation is all about what you would do if you started an allotment from the beginning. And this comes up because last week we had a couple of people who have just got their new allotments. The first one is a photo I'm going to share. I shared this last week, but it's worthy because of the topic for this week. And this was Digwell's allotment, which I've got to say, or his new allotment, I should say, just opposite his current one. I've got to say that is in amazingly good condition. And I can see what I would do straight away. But it is pretty well looked after to start off with. Most people's allotment are a complete and utter mess when they take them on. Mine was up here with weeds and things that were planted that shouldn't be there and couch grass and things like that. Now, there was another person who's got their first allotment as well, and they've actually sent me a video of their first allotment. So let's go have a look at this, and then we'll come back and suggest what we would do.
Here I am then, on the plot. Let me take you up to my site. Some lovely plots on here. Everybody's busy working away. I've waited quite a long time to get this, so it's really, really exciting. I'm right at the top, which I really like because it's got the best views. I mean, look at these plots. They look fabulous. This one I really like. It's got loads of flowers, which is definitely a bit of me. That just looks brilliant. I'm right at the top, so let's keep going. Nice cabbages there. There's a few chickens up here as well, but no chickens anymore. I think they've stopped chickens. And there's a few greenhouses, but no glass anymore either. So that's another one of the walls. This one looks nice. They all look great, to be honest. I am right at the top. Okay, let me take you to my plot. So good thing is I've got water. Here's my water supply. That's great news. Here's not such great news. So for the first year I'm not being charged any rent because it is in this state. So let me show you. This is the neighbours, but this is mine coming up here. So I'm going to try and clear this path to start with, which is going to be job number one. I've already started clearing a little bit, but this is ours. So as you can see, it is very, very overgrown. So I've started clearing here, but there is still all this to go here. So there is an awful lot to clear, but it's quite a nice little plot. Got some good views at the back there. We had a choice, so it was either this plot or this one behind me, which I did like. It was a half plot and it was a nice size. However, these 3 sheds here have had pigeons in them, and they are full of pigeon poop, and I really didn't want the responsibility of getting rid of those sheds. They're not in a great way. So we turned this one down and we've took this one on instead. So this is the plot. What I'll do is I'll keep you posted with it and tell you how we get on from here onwards.
There we go. Let me take my headphones off so I can hear what I'm saying. There we go. That is Rebecca's plot. Now that, to me, is what most people's plot will look like when they first take it on. Complete and utter mess. I've taken on 3 allotments in my lifetime, and they've all looked just like that. So where would we go from there? First thing I personally would do is just to walk around and make some notes, because there may be some good plants amongst it. On one of mine, I had plenty of blueberries. On my current one, I've got some raspberries that were still there. There's red currants and black currants. Those I have kept. So it's worth just walking around and keeping a note of where we would go from that. That's the first thing I would do. Make a note of what we have. Let's have a quick look at the comments on Instagram. Tom Woodstock joined. Lovely to see you. Hope you are well. And he says, and the bearded growers, say, mine was full of brambles. Some of the roots were as big as my head. It's not unusual. It's not unusual at all. Ballycillian says, first thing I would do is sit on a chair and make notes of where the sun rises and falls. That's actually a very good point. Where the sun rises and falls does make a big difference, and it's something we do need to learn because it does affect the growing or the gardening. But quite often when you take on an allotment, you do have these stupid restrictions or rules that you have to cultivate a certain percentage in such a time. And that, I think, adds some pressure, because you can cultivate it or could get into cultivating, but it can be done poorly. And I think it's far better to try and do the job properly. We'll get into that in just a moment. Digwell says, the big pile of dockweeds on the left shows what was there a few weeks ago. Talking about his allotment, of course, we would all dream of taking on an allotment that looks like that. And I think most people expect an allotment to look like that when they take it on. It doesn't work that way, does it? Richard Golden says, I've tried to leave mine for a year just to see what's going on to grow on there straight away. But I've had to do something with it because the local council says I need to tidy it up a bit. Yeah. And I think that's half of the trouble, is that you need to keep it tidy, but you also need to learn what your plot is like before you set anything in concrete, before you really put your plans into place. I remember when I first took on my allotment, I built some beds, I put them all to size, and I kind of wish I hadn't done that. I kind of wish, now I've been there for a while, I'd changed things up. But this is why we learn. This is what we learn. Mark Green says, evening, welcome along. Digwell says, only work on a small area at a time, do it well and move on. Absolutely. Very absolutely. Again, we'll get into that in just a moment. Chili Kate says, we were apparently lucky because they rotivated ours before we took it on, and the bindweed and couch grass. Rotivating is something else I want to get into as well. First job is to make a compost heap. So when you start clearing the weeds, there's an area to pop the weeds to start composting. Yep. Excellent. Bellington says, second, get my fruit trees planted where they'll cast no shade. Digwell says, find out the direction of the prevailing winds. Yep, again, sitting down and learning all that. Rebecca says, shall I tell you the first thing I did? I sat down and had a cup of tea and then had another one. Indeed. Bearded Growers on Instagram says, only good thing I had was a concrete base for the shed. And Octopod Kayaks has joined as well. So, first thing I would do, as I said, I would walk around and just make a note of where everything is. Now, after that, I wouldn't make any plans just yet, but I would just try and make a rough idea, work out at the same time, work out where the sun rises, where the winds are going to come from. I'll try and get to know your allotment neighbours as well, because they are going to share with you a few ideas or their knowledge that they've had from their allotment. But then once I've sort of done a bit of groundwork, done a bit of research, shall we say, we'll call that the research stage. We then need to move on to the clearing stage. And to be honest, what I would personally do is cut everything down to ground level. Now, I wouldn't use a strimmer. I wouldn't use a rotavator either. I would use a brush cutter. Now, if you haven't heard of what a brush cutter is, it works a bit like a strimmer, except it's a spinning blade instead of a bit of string. It's quite dangerous, so exercise caution with it, but it is a spinning blade and it will cut through brambles like a hot knife through butter. It would do a much better job. Once it's all cut down, I would then probably before cutting it down, make a temporary compost bin out of pallets and just start getting that stuff composted down. You're going to need compost. It's one of the things we always need. And the more compost you can make, the better it's going to be. And at the beginning, you're going to have so much material that you're going to be able to get a really hot compost, which should kill off any of the weed seeds. And then what I would do is start the clearing stage. Now, as I said, I would not rotivate. Would not rotivate at all. I made a mistake on my allotment and it chopped up all that couch grass, all those little bits of roots. It chopped those up into tiny little pieces. We always battle with couch grass. And because of that, because all those little pieces, that it multiplied the amount of couch grass that we had. So I would not rotivate. I would start in one corner and start working back, clearing away all the weeds, trying to clear out the roots in the ground. Start in the same place every time, because what you'll find is that if you go to places that you haven't done yet, that first place that you started with, the weeds will come back. Whereas, like I do with my allotment, I try and visit the allotment daily. I always start weeding in the same place. That first bed hardly ever gets any weeds onto it, and it takes less and less time to remove the weeds each time I visit, which means I can then work my way back. But I always start in the same place. Does that make sense? If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask away, because this might be a bit of a joint question. Of course, we want your tips and advice as well. What would you do if you were to start an allotment from the beginning? Muddy Boots says, do a plan to scale. Chat with other gardeners of inherent problems. Absolutely, yeah. That's the research, the planning stage. Now, personally, I wouldn't set any plans in stone until a year, once you're happy with everything, just because plans change as you go along. Turbo Extreme says, once you have cleared it, then possibly measure the plot and make a diagram of it and start planning where things might go. Don't forget as well to read the rules that you have. Some rules have what you can and can't have on the allotment. I know Rebecca in that video mentioned chickens, which if you put chickens on the allotment, they would clear those weeds out in next to no time. But if you're not allowed them, it's not really an option. Over on Instagram, nothing going on there. Seed to table, you could do a soil test to see what you're working with. That's a good idea. A soil test. Once you get down to the soil, of course, see what your pH levels what your pH level is, and possibly even going for a more advanced soil test to see your NPK levels and things like that. Digwell says the plans change 10 times. Yeah, this is why I don't think it's worth setting your plans in stone until you're used to it. What I was saying earlier, actually, when I first built my allotment, I gave myself paths that were 30 centimeters wide. And that was a big mistake, partly because I'm size 12 feet. So I couldn't even walk down there because my feet were too big. But I also couldn't get a wheelbarrow down. So when I adjusted my allotment, I doubled that to 60 centimeters, and I can now get my wheelbarrows down. So that is where setting your plans in place, your attitude changes over time. I did 30 centimeters because I wanted to have as much growing space as possible. Bearded Grower says, definitely don't waste that early compost material. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a godsend. You're going to need it. And it's very easy to get 3-4 pallets to build your first compost bin. Again, because it's pallets, it can be moved around. It doesn't need to stay where it is. Scott says, draw out a map of where you want beds and paths, and don't make the mistake I made, and make sure you make the paths a decent size. Exactly what I was just saying. Again, make a rough plan. Make a rough plan. Turbo Stream says, definitely get a comfy chair to sit and procrastinate on things on. Probably one of the most important tools is a chair to sit on the allotment, or somewhere to sit down on the allotment, have a cup of tea, and just draw out your plans in your head and think to yourself. You know, it is one of the most important things, I think. I don't actually have a chair on my allotment, though, thinking about it. Digwell says, as you know, we are not allowed compost bins on this private estate, hence the big pile of docks waiting to be collected. That's one of the downsides of some allotments. This is why every allotment is going to be different. You've got to read through the rules that you are given when you take on an allotment, and then you can learn a lot more about it. Yeah, bearded growers, I would definitely say clear a bit, then plant something, so you have something to watch grow instead of just weeding. That's actually a good point as well. Yeah, I would clear an area and start growing something. Again, that's something I did do on my allotment. You know, even now, July, there's still plenty of things that we could plant or grow. Plus, it gives you something to do, something to watch. If you can get something like courgettes or pumpkins, if you are lucky enough to get any of those, they could still go in and they could probably still produce. But also things like spinach, radish, carrots, plenty of options. Carrots I probably wouldn't do. I probably wouldn't direct sow anything, because you are going to get lots of weed seeds in the soil that are going to start growing in that first few weeks once you clear the ground anyway. But anything you can plant out, you still got to keep it weed free, of course, which is easier said than done. Bally Soon says, unrelated, but the first job I done today was take green waste out of the allotment skip for my compost bin. Such a waste dumping it in the skip. I couldn't agree more. Kate says, learn about your soil type and test pH. Do this in several spread out areas. Yes, soil type. Is it clay, loam, or sandy soil? Again, all these are good to use with. All these soils are good and bad in their own ways, and there's things you can do about it. Turbo Stream says, I would cover an area with mulch or cardboard so you don't have to maintain that whole plot in one go. Make it easy on yourself going forward. Again, that's not a bad idea. This is why I would start off with the brush cutter and get it all down to ground level. Cover it over. I use a lot of cardboard at the moment. I'm covering my allotment in, like, at my squash areas and things like that, in cardboard to suppress those weeds, because it just works so well. But cardboard is free, cheap, and biodegradable, so it can certainly be used quite well. There are, of course, what they called weed suppressing membranes and things like that you could use if you wanted as well. Bit of expense in that, but cardboard is what I would use personally. Rotivators are like weed killers, says Nigel. Used correctly, they are both fine. Problem with rotivating is caused by people who did not weed fully to start with. Yes, that's why on a first allotment, I would not rotivate. You've got to get rid of those weeds first. So that's something I'm stressing here. My opinion, everyone's got their own opinion, but don't rotivate. It's not a great method. Nigel says, amazing how many videos I see with weeds big as the crops. You should see my neighbour's allotment. I'll show you it someday. I've seen dock seeds scattered 20 feet away in all directions by amateur plot holder strimming. Yeah. If making raised beds, try to make them all the same size. This makes covers and cloches interchangeable. Yes, I'd agree with that. I totally agree with that. But that's probably a bit further down the line. When you're making your plans, all my raised beds are pretty much all the same size because it just makes life easier. All my tools are designed to fit within that, the cloches and things like that. So again, that's a good idea too. Bearded Grower says covering the ground once cleared can help you out, not re-weeding. Try to avoid mesh weed membranes as they don't last and become a nightmare. My biggest and first mistake. I agree with that as well. My neighbour's put down a load of that weed suppressing membrane. I've used it in the past, but theirs got lifted up in one of the storms and it got caught on my gooseberry bushes, and loads of tiny little plastic shreds of plastic ribbon is caught around my gooseberry bushes, and that is a pain in the bottom, to be honest with you. Digwell says marrows can smother a lot of open ground. Yeah, marrows, courgettes, pumpkins, anything like that are gonna work. You can actually grow many of these in your compost bins as well to help you out too. Rebecca says, I mentioned I'm not getting charged rent this year, which is great. However, next year's fees are just £10 for a year. How amazing is that? That is bloody good. I'm over £100 now for a full-size plot. That is really good price. £10 a year, really good price. I would look into attracting wildlife from the start and build that into your plans. So this is, again, coming back to research planning. Again, I think the planning stage will probably happen more once we've cleared. And once you've started growing a few things to see how they react. As we've mentioned, courgettes, pumpkins, marrows to try and suppress any weeds in any areas that have been cleared. It's going to give you a good idea as well of how well they will actually grow in your allotment, which should give you a good idea moving forward as well and what you're going to grow in the future. Again, this is all in the research stage and what have you. Digwell says, easy to test the soil type yourself. I did a video on it earlier this year. Yeah, totally right. There's lots of options for soil testing. And my thing is just gone. Why is that? I'm still here. Let me just, I hate it when it does this. I don't know why it started doing this. There we go. There we go. Rebecca, Idaho says that is a bargain completely. Turbo Extreme says, now on every visit to my allotment, spend a few minutes with the hoe. Has made such a difference this year. Tried to no dig, but it's hard to make enough compost. I agree, it is hard to make enough compost to do no dig. Don't forget, you can buy in compost. I do think it is expensive, but I don't really think it's possible. We're trying though, but I don't think it's possible to produce enough compost to not buy any in on an allotment. If you can, fantastic, great. But I also recommend spending a few minutes on with the hoe every time you visit. You know me, every day I'm on the allotment and every day I'm weeding for that very reason. It makes a huge difference. It really does. It's far easier to keep weeds at bay than letting them take hold and then try and tackle them. Little and often, that's the word I'm looking for, little and often. Bearded Grows, my one plot is raised beds, so I have a pond liner to cover the beds when not in use. Again, that's another idea. I'm not a fair weather gardener. I garden all year round, and I think it is important. In fact, this is another thing we might want to think about doing. I think it's important to have something grown in the soil, ideally all year round. And if it can't be vegetables, then I urge the use of microgreens. This could be something like field beans. Phacelia is one of my favorites because it grows quick, it gets big, it shades out all of the weeds, and it produces flowers that the wildlife love. And they add good nutrients to the soil in many cases as well. So in fact, once you've cleared an area, you might want to sow some green manures. That might be another way of trying to keep on top of everything. As I said, my favourite is Phacelia, field beans. There's some summer mixes. think mustard is a type of field bit of green manure you could use as well. That's another thing. We don't talk enough about green manures in some ways, but I think they are very, very important to an organic garden. Weed membrane comes in various qualities. Something from Poundland is probably not going to see the season out. I agree. But hey ho. The trouble is, an allotment can get very expensive. It's very easy to spend a fortune on lots of things. I just realised my lights have gone weird. I was just looking in the camera and saw that there. Our plots are £30, same as the council ones. £30. That's cheap. That's cheap. I pay 40. You're making me all jealous. My plots are now £54 for each half plot. It's gone up from 30. Similar to mine there. I'm glad I'm in the same boat as somebody at least. I've got weed membrane for over 4 years old in my strawberry beds. Still a few more years of life left in it. Again, I agree with that. I think Charles Dowding uses like DPM that he uses every year over and over. And I think, it's great if you can use it. It used to be quite common to use carpet, wasn't it? But that's been banned in most allotments now. Again, it comes back to reading the rules. So, yeah. Rebecca says it's a lot cheaper up north. And Scott says my plots are £13 each year now. Chili Kate says check out where there is an allotment association and shop. Well worth joining. Again, so we're coming back to the research. So let's put ourselves at a point that we've done a research, we've cleared the allotment, we've made a plan. Now, for me, one of the first things that I think we need to get into the allotment is the shed. And the reason I start with the shed, if you are allowed a shed, of course, is one, it's quite a big thing to move onto an allotment. So you probably want to get it built and try and get it in the right place, first of all, before you start trying to lift it over your plants, trampling over lots of things that you want to grow. So it's probably well worth getting a shed in place as one of the first things to do. But the advantage with a shed, one, if you are on the allotment, it's raining, it gives you somewhere to go and get out the rain, somewhere to make a nice cup of tea up as well, to keep yourself going, keep the biscuits. But two, the most important thing is, of course, we use it for keeping our tools. And if you're going to work on an allotment, you need a lot of tools. So definitely a shed would be one of the first things I would get up. Greenhouse as well, if you are able to get a greenhouse. The greenhouse in many cases is a luxury. Once those two things are up, you're going. You're ready to go, I would say. Of course, tools. Many of us probably already have lots of gardening tools, but again, an allotment can be very expensive. And I don't recommend, when it comes to an allotment, going out and buying lots of brand new tools. There's a good chance they will get stolen. Allotments are easy pickings. What I would recommend, go to a car boot, buy some tools for a couple of quid. They are probably going to be much older, but often they will last a lot longer because they are so much older. They might need a bit of cleaning, they might need a bit of treating, but if they get stolen at the end of the day, if a spade only costs you a quid, say, and it gets stolen, you've only lost a quid. Spades are probably like £50 in the garden centre these days, brand new. I'd rather you lose a quid than 50 quid. That's the way I look at it. Let's have a quick look on the comments. Instagram. Skinny Jean Gardner has joined. How are you doing, my friend? What have we got? Seed to table. Scott says, with Phacelia, I read you are supposed to remove before flowering, and I couldn't bring myself to do it, to remove the bees love it. It's kind of true, because you don't really want the seeds to the flowers to go to seed, but to be honest, I don't really worry about it. At the end of the day, it all works well. Turbo Stream says, don't spend a fortune on stuff. You might not like the effort of an allotment. Loads of new plot holders this year on our site. They think they can come down once every 2 months. It's true. One of the big things I think every allotment holder needs to know is an allotment is a big commitment. When I took mine on, they said that you are going to at least pot 4 hours of work in each week to maintain an allotment. I would actually say more than that. I reckon near 8 to 10 hours. That's why I pop to the allotment daily. Was there something just pop up on the screen? Oh, I don't know. That's why I pop to the allotment at least once a day, because it just makes life easier and it cuts down that 8 hours. Instead of it being 8 hours on a weekend, half hour each day works out much better. Carpet is banned because there is no guarantee that the plot holder will use woolen carpets. Most are synthetic these days, yeah. Again, this is something none of us have actually mentioned, and I'm quite glad about it, of using weed killer when you first start an allotment. When I first sort of started out on the allotment, one of the things I read, and I hated this because I don't use weed killer, but somebody said that, and it was a well-known website, well-known gardening author, or allotment author, I should say. He said that he doesn't think it was possible to clear an allotment without weed killer, which I don't agree with at all. It's a lot more work to clear it without weed killer, but it is an option, but I don't want to go down the weed killer route. Of course, anybody watching this, what you do with your own allotment is up to you. You might want to use a weed killer. I urge you not to. Stuart Jackson says, I still understand why they have the rules, no sheds or no water, but I still don't understand that. Yeah. In fact, your two things, actually, if you've got your shed up, if you are allowed sheds, you're going to want to get water butts up. And Rebecca showed us in that video, she had water already on her plot. So she might not need water butts, but again, plants do so much better with rainwater. So I'd urge to try and get some water butts set up as well. Bearded growers, we are allowed 2 structures on our plots. So with a shed being a must, it's a choice between a polytunnel or a greenhouse. You know what? I'm not a fan of polytunnels. I've spoken about this many, many times before. I've had polytunnels in the past, but I find particularly the cheaper ones, the ones that were like you could get from Wilco's or the range, that go together like putting a gazebo together, a tent sort of thing. They are, in my opinion, useless in strong wind or any wind. And I've had a few of those that have only lasted a few months, so I've never bothered with them. That's why I prefer greenhouses. Much more rigid, much more stronger to take on some of the bad weather. That being said, I have thought about getting a polytunnel, believe it or not, but if I was to get a polytunnel, I would spend over £300 and get a decent one that really does go together. No plastic connectors, one that goes together really, really well. So greenhouse or polytunnel, up to you. Polytunnel is probably better on an allotment, but get a decent one. It's my advice on that. Richard Golden, I don't lock my shed. If they want something, they can have it. Again, it's a difficult one. That's something we spoke about when it came to allotment security, but something to think about. Now, Digweb does come up with a very good point. Plenty of cheap stolen tools at car boot sales. This is also true. And this is where there is a bit of a dilemma. I always say go to a car boot, and I would hope that none of them are stolen, but there is a possibility they have been stolen, of course. Same as Facebook Marketplace. But I come back to the fact that, would you rather have a £50 spade stolen from your shed or a spade that's cost you £1? And not all people that sell at car boots are going to be there are selling stolen goods. Some of it may be because they're just clearing out some space in their shed. But it is something to think about. I mean, it's a difficult one. It's like people who sell tools in car parks. You know, when you go into a B&Q or something and somebody comes along as you're going in, want to buy some drills? I've got some going cheap. I won't buy from those at all. Find out what your site manager's favourite biscuits are and get to know them. Yeah. Good evening, all. Sorry I am late. Not a problem, Rob. We're talking about what would you do if you would start your allotment from scratch again. Turbo Extreme, they're going to make starter plots on our site, so any new plot holder can do a season on there to see how they go. The chairman keeps telling me of the troublesome plots that aren't getting worked. Funny enough, they do that on my site as well. They've got quarter pots for new plot holders to see how they get on. It works, actually. It does work. What have we got? Kate says, one of the most bizarre and shocking things I heard when I had my old allotment was the guy opposite had loads of weeds. He covered it in petrol and set it alight. Thankfully, it didn't spread. Yeah, these are the things people will do to try and clear it. You've just got to be thinking about it. Rebecca says, the first bit of advice from my neighbour was get yourself the strongest weed killer off the internet and get it done and come back in 3 weeks. I tried to be polite and said I don't mind hard work. Yeah, you will get that a lot. You will get that a lot. I don't like weed killer. It's not illegal to use. I don't like it. I've never used it and I will never use it. Rebecca says, the next day I got offered some slug pellets. You're going to need lots of those, I got told. I'll tell you what, I'm trying some slug. It's not a slug killer. It's a repellent from Andermatt. It's quite pricey. It was £10 for the bag, but it is working a treat, I've got to say. It doesn't kill slugs. It just deters them. Got myself a lovely Dutch hole from a car boot. First strike, it snapped as it was riddled with woodworm. That is always a risk. That's why I said sometimes you do need to treat them sometimes with a bit of oil as well, because the handles can be dry. Nigel says, some good plastic tunnels on the market. The important thing is thick quality frame. You can replace the cheap cover with a proper poly skin when required. Yeah, just get a decent, spend some money on it. Don't get the cheap ones, is my thoughts on that. TurboStream brought new water butt taps with those hose connectors, Digwell suggested. Digwell says you can tell ones with stolen gear at car boots as they have a tatty big white transit van. Matey boy with his tools laid out on the tartan rug is probably selling his own. Yeah, you're generalising there, but you never know. You never know. Either way, just bear it in mind. Rob says, first thing I did when I got my last allotment was to walk around the site and see what other plot holders were doing. Again, that's research, isn't it? Turbo Stream, I've not used weed killer. The modern stuff doesn't work anyway. Yeah. And Digwell says, depends on what you class as weed killer. Many are organic. There are organic ones. I still worry about them. Right. So at the moment, this is where we are with this new allotment. We've sat down, we've drawn our rough plans, we've done our research stage, we've spoken to the neighbours, we've cleared things, we've got a few things growing just to have something going on the plot, trying to remove all the weeds and trying to keep on top of weeds. We got a shed and our structures built. Where do we go from there? We'll come to that in just a moment. I'm just going to get you thinking about that. Let's have a quick look on Instagram quickly. I'm going to get you thinking about that. Let's go to the video because I'm going to do the mission video because it was a bit of a failure. You'll see why. Okay, well, this week's mission was to create a mini JJ. Spent a long time trying to decide how to do this. I'm not an artist. I'm not a creator in that sense. So I discovered this air drying clay. And I was thinking along the lines, we could make a mini gnome. Now, I have to admit, I'm not a very crafty person like this when it comes to making things artistic anyway. I've discovered that this air drying clay, which I thought we could use to try and make a gnome to try and replicate JJ. I thought that might work. In fact, that's what I was looking for, a sort of gnome type thing we could use. Now, I've made the body and the head here, and I've tried to cut away some legs on the bottom in case you're wondering what that's all about. Now, I'm not saying we've done a great job at all, but it was a start. Working with clay is something I've never done before, but I discovered this air drying clay and I thought I'm going to try it out because I've got a few projects that I want to do in the future. I've attached on some arms, or tried to get attached on some arms, but they keep coming on and off, as does the head. So this was very much learning curve that we had to do. I had to cut away the base to make the legs a little bit more prominent and get the body and the heads to stand upright all together. And of course we had to add a beard at some point as well. So it was all very much a challenge of trying to make this terracotta clay model work. Air drying clay I thought would dry in the air, but I discovered, I mean, it does dry in the air. It worked better. It did take a while to dry, but putting it in a greenhouse seemed to speed it up. So yeah, we had a go. I'm going to show you what we ended up with when we go back to the studio, because I'm not happy. With that, let's head back to the studio. So, as you can see, the attempt went very, very wrong. It was drying out in the greenhouse. It dried out. I touched it. The head fell off. The beard fell off. The arm fell off because I was going to paint it all as well. And this happened today. So it didn't quite work. It's given us the idea of what we can do with this air drying clay. We're going to try again another day. But for this, it's mission failed. Don't forget, I need a mission for next week as well. It was fun. It was a fun attempt. I'm not very artistic. I'm not very good at making things look good. I call myself an engineering creative in that I got ideas, I can make things work, but they don't look good. We're going to try again though. JJ, don't feel left out. We will try again. I need a mission for next week. Anybody's got any ideas for a mission for next week? And get thinking, cap on and share it. Turbo Extreme says, I had a spade from the sharing bench this week on our plot. Looked an old one. Actually, that's not a bad idea. Often you do find some people who've given up their allotment will put Turbo Streams, actually, their allotment has a sharing bench. So if anybody wants to donate anything, they put it on the bench. Somebody else can use it. They take it. I think that's a good idea. Again, chatting to fellow allotment holders might be able to give you a few ideas on what you can do with that. Turbo Stream says morph. It is a bit like morph, wasn't it? A terracotta snowman. I'm going to practice with that. I'm going to make some better because I do think I can do better. JJ, I'm assuming that's JJ tonight anyway. Oh Christ. Dick Well says, a voodoo doll, watch out for the prickly feeling in the back. Sticking the knife in my delicate area makes me scared. Yeah, okie dokie. Mission for next week. How about cooking something you've grown on the plot this year? Yeah, I can do that actually. That sounds like a good idea. I'm not allowed to cook on my plot. We're not allowed anything gas or anything like that on the allotment. So I have to do it here at home. But I've got potatoes, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli. I've got so much food coming in. I can definitely do something. If everybody agrees to that, cooking something that I've grown on the plot, and I will eat it in front of you as well as an extra thing. Yeah. Any ideas, though, feel free to share. Bearded morph or headless bearded morph? Well, tried. Yeah, I tried. It's weird. I thought it would be easy. I haven't worked with clay since I was at school. I thought, oh yeah, you just mold it, it'll be easy. How wrong was I? I went away and watched some YouTube videos last night and went, oh, that's what I should have done instead. Hey, you live and learn. But we've still got an air dry terracotta clay. I'm going to be trying to make my own other pot at some point. Turbo Extreme, I also had a Dalek composter and a water butt, hence new taps on the sharing bench as well. Fantastic. Rob gives in the thumbs up. Yep, please do give us a thumbs up, a like and subscribe. Don't forget to click the notifications so that you know when we go live. Mission for next week, see how far you can throw a clay model of JJ. Yeah. I'm not going to throw it. I'm going to try and rescue it and try and make another one. I've been making a potato salad with the very small potatoes this week with French beans and a few broad beans. Lovely. I work with clay every time I plant a tree, but yeah, I got clay soil as well. But try with modeling stuff with that clay. That's all I'm saying. It's not as easy as it looks. Cooking from the plot. Yeah, well, I can't cook on the allotment. I could cook in the garden though. I might, I might do that. Right. So we've got our sheds up on this new allotment. Now, where would we go? What would we do? What would you think of doing next? So the shed, the structures are in place. Over on Instagram, the messy allotmenteer has joined. Thank you so much. Please feel free to join in and share your thoughts on where you would start with an allotment. Or if you've got any questions, throw them up as well, especially if you do have a new allotment. As I said, I think one of the first things I would do is get the brush cutter in and cut all those weeds down, because a brush cutter is much better than the strimmer. It's going to last longer and do a better job. It will chop through brambles. And really, once you've got it down to the ground, you really do need to dig some of those perennial roots, the brambles, the docks and things like that. The more the weeds you get out in the beginning, the better it is going to be. And don't forget, the seeds can still be in the soil. So your first couple of years, you are going to be battling those weeds for quite a while. This is why I say once the shed and the structures are up, you might want to put in your paths, thinking about it. A bench to sit on or somewhere to sit. Where are you going to put that? As well as your beds. These all hopefully came from the plans. Tilly Kate, I've got a question and it's actually on topic. I'm part of a community project and we've been offered a growing space. It's currently lawn. What's the best way to prepare it? We have pallet collars. So if it's currently lawn and it's not a weedy site, this is what I would do. And I'll throw this out to anybody else. I would get the lawnmower out, cut that grass down, because I'm doing exactly the same in my garden. Cut that grass down as low as you can get it. Get your pallet borders, pot those on the grass, try and get them level, of course. Then place cardboard on the inside of the pallet collars on the grass, and then fill it up with compost. There you go, your bed is done, ready to go. That's what I would do. I'll throw that open to anybody else. Billy Grass had some lovely chicken and rice with French beans and courgette harvest this morning from the plot. Fantastic. I've got to admit, I don't think we're going to get any beans here this year, apart from broad beans, but excellent. Did the chicken come from the allotment as well, though? That's the big question. Rebecca says, I've got to make a border between my neighbours. Do you think I could use lavender as a border, as I've got lots of cuttings, so it's free? You can certainly use lavender. What I would be inclined to do to make a border, however, would be make like an edible hedge. So currants, gooseberries, maybe the odd small apple tree thrown in there, and things like that to make it more of like an edible fence. That's what I would be inclined to do, but you can certainly use lavender. I would probably save lavender for, you meant like going around the borders of your beds. You know, like in the Victorian gardens, if you ever visit Victorian gardens, they would have box hedging around the edge of their beds. I would use lavender or rosemary for that instead, personally. Or that's what I would love to do. In fact, something I'm thinking of doing here at home now. I've got it in my mind, but that's what I would do. But if you've got the lavender, then use it. Of course. Dear says, do you know why poppies appeared on World War I battlefields? Because the bombs lifted the 30-yard seeds to the surface. The same happens when rotating a new plot, not your own established one. Yeah, that is true. Poppy seeds are what, I mean, I get poppy seeds all the time on my allotment now, but they will be in the ground. When they brought up to the surface, that's when poppies germinate. So sometimes when you're digging over or rotating the soil, you're actually bringing up the weed seeds as well, and that can cause them to germinate. This is why I say it'll probably take a couple of years to really get on top of the weeds. But poppies, I mean, would you class poppy? I mean, a plant that's in the wrong place is a weed, but would you really call poppies a weed? I wouldn't. It was lovely. One pot in the oven. Delicious chicken came from the shop. Fantastic, fantastic. Rebecca says, "Oh, that's a brilliant idea, Richard. I love an edible hedge." That's what I would do. That's what I would do. And I did that on my allotment with the elder tree. I wouldn't use elder because it's too big, and I'm changing it over onto more better things now. Pears, apples, but small ones. Train to be like a fence, things like that. There's lots of options there, really. Once you get your thinking cap on, this is the great thing we do on this show is we can share these ideas. But one thing I'm trying to do more of, and I'm buying cheap trees to do this, is I'm trying to espalier train apple trees, pear trees, and things like that to be more like a fence where you just have 3 branches going out like that with the stem going up the middle to make like a fence. We're going to have some at home on the garden, some down the allotment. They would take a couple of years to really get established and do the right thing. But I think, to me, if you're starting from a brand new allotment, this is something you would probably want to get started straight away. There's also things like perennial plants, actually. Asparagus that can take 3 years to establish, but will give you crops for 20 years. You might want to get that in at the beginning. The mistake I made with asparagus, however, I wanted to get it in right at the beginning of my allotment, but I didn't clear the weeds away well enough in the beginning. I'm still battling that to this day. So if you want to get things like rhubarb, asparagus, make sure it's fully weeded. But they're perennials. They might take a couple of years, 3 years to establish. So you want to get those in quite early. Lawn conversion. I would mark out a bed, dig up the turf in squares and place the sod's grass downwards. This is an excellent form of loam. Top with well-rotted manure and bagged compost or topsoil. Absolutely. That is a way I used to do it. I have to admit, I've got a turf iron purposely for digging up lawn. But dig those up, put them upside down behind a shed, let them rot down, and boom, you got some lovely loam soil as well. I'm building a windbreak using small fruit trees and soft fruit bushes on the windward edge. Good idea. Good idea indeed. Anything like that is just going to help with that. I meant to say the same applies to dock seeds, which are viable for 80 years. Again, that is totally right. Totally right. Rob says, the only problem with doing a hedge, who trims it when it gets overgrown? Well, if you are looking after it, if you are there regularly, you would be trimming it all the time anyway, or maintaining it as part of your routine. It would only be if you neglect it that I think it would be a problem, or if you give it up. But our allotment, we have to clear everything out when we give up our allotment anyway, so it's not a problem for us. Scott says, wish I planted asparagus straight away and still needed to when we plant crowns. And hang on, let me say that again. Wish I planted asparagus straight away and still need to. When can we plant crowns, or the latest we can plant them? So there are autumn planted asparagus crowns, which I actually have a lot more luck with planting. In fact, like most perennials, they sometimes are best planted in the autumn. If we plant them in the spring, what I tend to find is they need a lot more care because you've got to establish them. So they need watering regularly. They need keeping weed free. And as we go on into the summer, when a lot of stress on these plants, it becomes a bit harder to do that. So I actually prefer now to plant a lot of these perennial plants in the autumn. And the reason for that, the soil is still moist, still warm and moist when you plant them up, when you first plant them, so they get going. Then we go into the dormant time when the plant will shed its leaves, but it will concentrate on putting the roots into the ground, which is what you really need it. The ground is going to be moist all winter, so it takes away a lot of the hard work. Asparagus, you can definitely get autumn planted asparagus. The seeds that we've sent out the last couple of years on the Supporters Club in January, they will probably be okay as well, depending on how strong the plants are. And the same with trees and things like that. In fact, you can buy bare-rooted fruit trees and bushes sort of all September, October time, which are usually quite a bit cheaper, but they can only be planted in that autumn period because they are bare-rooted. So that's something to think about there. Again, this tallies up with that first allotment. And it was quite at the forefront, again, when I took on my allotment, is that as we went into the autumn, I was planting up a lot of these perennial trees and bushes for that very reason. Where were we? Muddy Boots says to Rob, when I inherited my plot, I had to remove a 2-foot wide laurel hedge, 25 foot long. Yeah, I mean, this is something you have to think about. When you give up your allotment, what's left? Is it still going to be there? Over on Instagram, Scrapyard Rocker has joined. Welcome along. Scott says, I shall be planting some in the autumn. Thanks, not a problem. And, oh, that's what I meant. What's that talking about? Oh, right. Yeah, when it gets passed on. Yeah, again, if you are planting, but same as any fruit bushes and things like that, you've got to think about that when you take it down. One of my allotment neighbours, not my immediate neighbours, but they've obviously given up their plot this year. I think the council have been down because they have literally gone from an overgrown wasteland to chopping everything down and cutting down some really good established pear trees and things like that have gone from this plot. So yeah, there's a lot of thoughts going on there about what happens when you leave the plot. Our allotment, if we don't remove everything, including the plants, we get fined and charged for the clearance. So it's in our interest to make sure we clear it all. I'll just come back to that in a second, actually. One thing you can do, there are some, like, when you're planting trees out particularly, there are some, like, root bags that you put the tree in with compost and stuff as well, and you plant it in the ground, and it's big enough for the roots to establish themselves, but it's easy enough that when you want to dig the tree out, you can actually lift it out of the ground quite easily. This is also the size of a rootstock if you are planting trees. Bear that in mind when it comes to that as well, because if you've got to get rid of it, that's something you might have to do. Greg says, all being well, in 2 days' time, I take on another plot. Not quite the size of our current one, but it has a greenhouse and a shed. Cannot wait to repair the greenhouse and weed it. Ah, fantastic. I tell you what, a greenhouse for me is one of the most important tools on any allotment of vegetable garden, just because it opens up so many more possibilities. You can grow food all year round so much easier with a greenhouse and things like that. Covered over mostly with plastic. I plan on going heavy on green manures whilst I get on top of the long grass around the rest of the plot. Again, I'm a big fan of green manures, and I think that's probably also something I would be sowing down quite soon after clearing as well, just to try and look after it. I will come back to, I think green manures might be a good topic, because there's some green manures we've mentioned before that actually have a cleansing effect on the soil. I think it might be mustard, but I might be wrong, which again will help in the future for getting rid of some of those pests and diseases. On that note as well, something I do want to mention is that for me, if I see an allotment that has, or a garden that has absolutely nothing growing in it, I would be more worried than if weeds are growing. The reason being, my old allotment, which was a sandy soil on top of chalk over in Brighton, we struggled to get anything to grow on there. And when I first took it on, and when I was thinking about it, we had weeds in patches, but there was also patches where nothing grew. And that's why sometimes seeing weeds grow is a good sign. It means that there is life in the soil and things are going to grow. So just a thought I had there popped into my head as these things happen sometimes. Digwell says, stop rubbing it in about the greenhouses. I'm sorry, Digwell. I know you're not allowed one. But hey ho. But Moneyboots does say a cold frame is a good addition to a plot. Yeah, cold frame, cloches, things like that. They're going to help get it growing early and protect that soil. And if you are, we are July at the moment. It's quite late in the season, but there's still lots of things that we can grow. We can extend that growing time with cloches, cold frames, etc. etc. Greg says, I have a cheap polytunnel too. It is obsession with mine with chili and pepper plants. I'm with you on that too. Right, let's go to this week's Sow Along, and then we'll come back and continue this conversation. Well, this week's Sow Along, I'm going out to my Vegipod. Vegipod is fantastic for growing leaves following seeds because of the way they work. We're just going to take off this top, and we will set to work of sowing these gourmet loose leaf salad leaf from Premier Seeds Direct. I'm starting off by just loosening the top of the soil, just raking it over with my hands, removing any weeds and anything like that. This is just a process I like to do to try and make sure the soil is nice and fluffy. Now the soil here is compost, of course. It's had plenty of nutrients and it's been watered before we start to sow the seeds as well. And all I'm going to do is sprinkle the seeds all over the area that I want to sow these in. Now, what I find with salad leaves, we try and grow plenty of salad leaves because we like to eat our salads, especially at the moment. As you know, I'm on a bit of a diet. And these are the seeds. They're pretty small. This is just a lovely mix of lettuce leaves. They're pretty cheap from Premier Seeds. If you want a discount code, VegPod10 for 10% off. Now, I'm just raking over the soil once again just to make sure the leaves of the seeds are in place, and we will give it a good watering. And what this will end up leading to is that we will get some lovely looking salad leaves that we can pick and eat. And I recommend picking the leaves as that makes them last a lot longer. Also recommend that you sow these seeds at least once a month in order to try and have an all year round supply of salad leaves. Incredibly easy to look after, and don't forget to share your tips. There we go. That is the salad leaves sown for this week's Sow Along. I grow a lot of salad leaves. I eat a lot of them. I had a huge bowl of salad with my steak tonight. Absolutely delicious, gotta say. I know they're not the most exciting, but don't underestimate the value of our salad leaves. So easy to grow. I grow them in my Vegipod. We have salads all year round for that very reason. Not much more I can say on that, really. If you've got any tips on how to grow salad leaves, let us know in the comments. I've been in a bit of a rush today. I got called out. I did say I was on call. I got called out. Well, I was meant to be there at 10 o'clock this morning. Didn't know about it until 11:30. So I had to go down to Southampton, and I got back about 4:15. So a bit of a rush today. Digwell says, I've seen a YouTube channel sort their pathways and wonder why nothing grows when they change your layout. Yeah. These are the things that sometimes social media is great, but there are some tips out there that are awful advice. I always sort of say, if somebody says they do something, see the proof a year later that it actually works. I had a conversation with a few people about this who have slated social media, but I've always sort of said if they can back up their ideas, then it's worth thinking about. But you've got to think long term. Stuart says, oh yeah, I haven't forgotten. If you haven't heard from me by Wednesday, give me a nudge again. I will sort that out for you. It's on my to-do list. Nigel says, I bet they have no slugs, talking about the salt on the paths. Indeed. My Ruby Country says, I seem to struggle with gooseberries. Something is eating the leaves. Any clue? I have sprayed it, but it seems to be slowing the problem. But I've lost so many plants in the past. Anna Jones says it sounds like gooseberry sawfly, which is my first thought as well. Gooseberry plants losing leaves and dying. Chances are it is gooseberry sawfly, which is a particularly horrible pest. Now, it's not a problem I've ever had. What I would be inclined to do, if anything, I'm trying to think of some of the ideas. There'll be some sort of deterrent available. I'm trying to think. Grazers, I don't think do anything. I'm trying to think what Andermatt do. And other ideas like that. But you want to try and deter. It's gooseberry sawfly. I'm pretty certain that is the problem. And If you can tackle gooseberry sawfly, get my words out. If you can find out what to do about gooseberry sawfly, and that reduces it, that will help. I can't think of any of the tips and tricks that I can think of, other than, of course, trying to encourage birds in to eat the gooseberry sawfly. But gooseberries are pretty tricky to try and deal with that. That would be my thought. Anyway, I'm pretty certain it's going to be gooseberry sawfly. Has anybody out there had problems with gooseberry sawfly, and how did they tackle them? Turbo Stream says, I had that on my gooseberries in the garden. I moved them to the allotment and it stopped, unless it was the pigeons at home. Could be. But I doubt it was the pigeons. I suspect it was probably the sawfly. I wonder if they are quite a localized pest. Again, as you know, I don't get many problems with pests, so I find it very difficult to help from experience when it comes to pests. My gooseberries seem to be untouched at the allotment. I wonder if it's a localized pest. Digwell says, fruit and vegetable protection nematodes sorts out sawfly. I was wondering if there was a nematode of some description out there. Where would you get that from, Digwell? Where is that possibly brought from? Let us know. So has anybody got any more questions or any more thoughts as well on this, while we answer this question as well, on how to start an allotment, what you would do to start an allotment? I think we've done the research stage, the clearing stage, and the beginning stages of building an allotment. I certainly think the infrastructure, the sheds, the greenhouses, and the main paths, hedging, they are probably some of the best places to start from as well. Then after that, it's all plain sailing. Biggest advice when it comes to any allotment that I can ever offer anyone is little and often. Take a daily visit to the allotment, even if it's just for 15 minutes. You will get so much done by the end of the week in such a short time. Nigel says Pytherium-based treatments for sawfly. What's Pytherium? Sometimes these big words. Rob says, if you put a shed on it, next thing is a stove and kettle. Yeah, stove, kettle, tools, that sort of thing. By the way, we do this, anybody who is watching in the future or after this live show, we do this show every Sunday at 6. We're always happy to have you come along and join in and share your own thoughts as well. It's always a good thing to see. Digwell says, Nemesis, Garden Naturally, Amazon, etc. sold everywhere for that fruit and vegetable protection on nematodes. And Nigel's Pytherium-based treatments, I'm guessing that's going to be sold in the same places as well. Anybody else, as I said, anybody else got any more questions on how to start an allotment or what they would do to start an allotment or anything they want to add? You know what? I've just thought of one of my other big tips that I've got to share. Enjoy it. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be a lifestyle choice, you could say, but it's meant to be fun. It's meant to be an enjoyable experience. Don't be too hard on yourself. I often think when people take on the allotment, they compare themselves to what other people's allotment looks like, and they want it looking like that straight away. It takes time. Don't be hard on yourself. Just enjoy it. It's your allotment. You do what you want with it. Stick within the rules, of course, but you often find the rules can be quite flexible. As long as they see you are trying, I think they are usually happy. Turbo Stream says, the first few years on the allotment are a big learning curve. Expect failures and don't be too hard on yourself. I'm on my 4th year and still grasping at the basics. I agree. You know, failures are a learning curve. You know, fail is the first attempt in learning. That's what it stands for. First attempt in learning. Scott says, I would say go at your own pace when taking on an allotment and don't compare your plot to other plots where they could be there every day, all day. Set your own goals and enjoy it. He goes on to say, was thinking exactly the same, Richard. Yeah, I do think that kind of sums it up. It is meant to be an enjoyable experience. Enjoy it. Setting goals, however, that's not a bad idea. One of my, I don't know if he listens anymore. It's going back many years ago, but I had him on the podcast and he said, he he set his allotment up a bit like a business plan. So he had targets where he wanted things done. I think he started leveling the ground as first thing he did as well. He had targets and dates that he wanted these things done, which is great if you are ultra organized and you can and do that with your own pressure. But the reality is, I'm particularly bad at this. I would say I want this job done by this date, and it ends up taking 3 times as long. I don't punish myself for it. I enjoy it. Belly Sin says, yes, enjoy it. Never worry about crops failing. I'm gardening 50 years and still learning. Absolutely right there. Absolutely right there. We are all just learning. Digwa says, don't fall to peer pressure. You are yourself. Work at your place. Absolutely. Absolutely. You're joining in on this. And I think it's, especially when we see a social media with people's allotments looking fantastic, and we think, why aren't ours looking like that? Reality is, a lot of these things, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that goes on. They're done to make it look good for that photo or that video or whatever it might be. You know, I often find myself being embarrassed of things on the allotment, and just don't worry about it. Just don't worry. It's your allotment. You enjoy it. My friend said to me, plant one for the wildlife and plant another for you. Talking about tip there, plant one for the wildlife and one for you. Talking about if you're planting cabbages, plant one for the wildlife, one for you, and so on. I tried to be like Charles Dowding, but realised I can't, says Turbo Stream. Yeah. You've got to remember, I mean, I've had this complaint. I think Charles Dowding's always quite open that he has people helping him on his vegetable garden anyway. But I've often heard of people that have watched, say, Monty Don on BBC Gardener's World, who, you know, again, Monty Don doesn't hide the fact that he has a team of people helping him in the garden as well. But they think that because of the way it's portrayed on TV, he does it all on his own. They think that anybody can do it. I mean, anybody can do it, but you can't do it all on your own in some cases, or to that level. Go at your own pace and enjoy it. Idaho says, I agree. Continue learning. Agreed. And socialize with other plot holders. Amazing how many people don't bother to speak. I'm one of those people that, not that I don't bother to speak, it's that I'm on my allotment. I'm focused on my own garden. I do speak to some of our people, but yeah, you know, I don't go out my way to disturb people on their plots to speak to them. 4 R's: repair, fix things, renew, replace plants, replenish, top up beds and compost, remove weeds. Yeah. The tenets of Digwell's gardening, the 4 R's. CD is running a business. You've got to remember that as well. It's, as I said, don't compare yourself to any of these people. You can use them as aspirations, inspiration, of course, and I think they are highly inspirational. But don't think that you can do exactly the same in your back garden with when you're working full time and you only have kids and dogs and things like that. Just go easy on yourself. Every week, CD. Don't forget that CD is a market gardener. He's in it for the money. Every week, CD. Oh, we mentioned him every. Well, same as, like I say, Monty Don on Gardener's World, and I'm trying to think of some others. I don't watch TV really, so they are portraying an image of gardening for TV, for so on. You get the idea. You get what I'm trying to say. Not many folk to talk to on our site, and CD also gets his income from doing workshops about no dig. The garden is his workshop. Yeah, I don't see any problem with that. As I said, I think the trouble is, the good thing about, say, YouTube, allotment holders on YouTube, you get to see real allotments and what it is really like looking after an allotment. You know, if you see a weed there when they're showing you digging up the potatoes, they don't worry about it so much because it's not really doing any harm. So enjoy it. That's the final thing on that. But if anybody has any questions they want to share, please do feel free. Let's have a look at your photos that we have had come in. That's what we like. So, Shipyard Gardener has been working hard. I think this came in from Buddy Cillian, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, my brain's gone a bit there. What a lovely looking plot, though. What a lovely looking plot. It looks fantastic, but full, of lush vegetative growth at the same time. Excellent work there. Scott's harvested some lovely potatoes. Again, Scott hasn't really been grown for that long, and look at all those potatoes. Done really, really well there, I've got to say. Really good lot of potatoes. What variety are they, Scott? Now, Kate, we've mentioned this, or we touched on this earlier. Kate said earlier about checking your soil. And funny enough, she is studying for an RHS certificate on soil health. So I thought that was a great tip that came in straight away there. And I'm hoping Kate in the future is going to share some tips for what she's learned from this RHS course. And seeing it once again, it's got me thinking about doing more RHS certificates and taking on courses. But I'm in an hour again. Nicholas shared this funny but true poster. When you leave in a garden centre, there's Mr. Bean there poking his eye around the corner, but then you see the clearance rack. It's true, isn't it? I'm always on the clearance rack. I spoke about this on last week's podcast. I've got some marjoram plants for 50p. I've got some other plants for a couple of quid, which I'm very, very happy with. The bargain basements and bargain corners on most allotments are well worth a visit. Highly recommend go and visit them, especially if you're starting out on a new allotment. You can get some cheap plants to get going. The range at the moment, I've been into a few shops of the range. Not my favorite place to get plants from, but sometimes you can get some bargains. They don't look after the plants very well there, is the only thing I would say. Or in some of them, I should say. I've got a blank screen there for some reason. I obviously missed something there. Nathan is unfortunately having trouble with pears. These pears look horribly cracked and black. I don't know how well you can see it. It looks like there's a horrible disease on that tree. Unfortunately, it does happen. It could be a really nasty blight from what I could see. Jenny, she has won this fantastic prize from Plant Grow. 2 loads of compost. I think these would have cost about £500 if I'm not mistaken. But it gives you something to think about. You know, when you start an allotment, you might need to import compost, and buying it in bulk is a cheaper way of doing it. Or winning competitions is another way to do it as well. Now, Ian shared this image. Obviously, we've gone through an election recently, and this image says the world would be a better place if we all grew vegetables instead of voting for them. I've got to say the world would be a better place if we all grew vegetables. Now, Stuart has been growing this rhubarb from seed. This is something I tend to do in a supporters club. In January, I send out rhubarb seeds, or have for the last couple of years. We've had a lot of success growing rhubarb from seed. It's so easy to do and so cheap, and you can get a lot for not much money. Yeah, that might be another thing to think about. Join the supporters club as well. £5 a month, and you get a good collection of seeds each month. Please do keep sharing your photos, post in our Facebook group, send to me via social media, or email me, richard@veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. That's richard@veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. Let's come back. So Anne Wright says, there's another tip: join the allotment / garden club if there is one. Often there's a shop and advice galore. Yeah, totally agree with that. Pop into your allotment shop, your garden club. Local gardeners often can tell you more about your local conditions and what does well and what doesn't do well than what anybody online can do, unless they are local to you. Everybody's gardens are different. Everybody's allotments are different, be it the soil type, the wind direction. The more localized you can get your advice from, the better advice you are going to get. Valley Cillian says, gardeners are like artists. We all have different styles, but produce works of art. That is actually a really good analogy. Really good analogy. I like that a lot. Toby Stream says, listen to the bloke who does a veg podcast on a Monday. Still don't know who he is. I think he's called the Veg Grower Podcast. one of the top podcasts in the world, in the garden world as well. So he obviously knows what he's talking about. I think people are going to argue with that now. Nor his money talking about, I guess, Charles Downing, I don't know. Digwell says, I posted the answer about the pears on Facebook. I did see it. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what it was. So apologies, but there is the answer in the Facebook page. Idaho says, because of the excessive heat, my favourite organic nursery gave away all their hot season veggie starts yesterday. I got there as soon as I could and they were cleaned out. You've got to be quick when it comes to these bargains, but there are some decent bargains to be had. The potatoes were Duke of York, and I used Andermatt Rutilizer potato mist. I think it worked really well, considering my potatoes got hit by a late frost, so I was knocked back. That I haven't no, that potato mist I have been using. I just remembered that is proving really, really well. It's really done well. I forgot completely about that. Thank you. Idaho, well, I went down the street and snapped into another place and got some for less than $1 each, which is still a good price. Absolutely. Digwell says, tell us the name of that podcast. It's the Veg Grower Podcast. Veg Grower Podcast, one of the top gardening podcasts in the world. Certainly one of the longest running as well. Thanks again for your advice on Facebook, talking about that pear. Yeah, I couldn't remember what his advice was. But yeah, Stewie Supporters Club, best £5 a month I spend it in my garden, win. Thank you so much for that, Stuart. Toby Stream, I listened to 2 episodes on the long drive to the most westerly point on the UK mainland last week. Fantastic. Hope they kept you entertained and inspired you to get into the allotment. B&Q are selling chili plants at £8 each. I tell you what, the price of chili plants or any plants this year has gone through the roof. I think they are far too expensive for the average gardener these days when you go to a garden centre or anything like that. I've been going to Car Boots every couple of weeks, and even those prices are up there. They're not the cheapest, but they are up. They're not the most expensive, sorry, but they are quite a bit more than what they've cost in the past. Digwell says, Andermatt Rutilizer has increased my spud yield in my trials. Yeah, it totally has. I completely forgot that I sprayed all my other potatoes with it, but it really has made a difference. Of course, the potato challenge is still to be, well, that's going to be the real test to see how well it's done. Rebecca says, thanks for great advice tonight. Off to watch the football now. Still got a few minutes to go. The football isn't on till 8 o'clock, is it? But don't worry, we will be out here between then. Digwell says those pears are suffering from pear scab. He actually put peas, but pear scab. That's what it was. I thought it was. Go over to what have we got on Instagram. So, my mum's joined over on Instagram. Plot 13A has joined, and Allotment Plot 25 has joined as well. Nice to see you. Nigel says, not noticed any difference with the Rutilizer. That's interesting. I've definitely noticed a difference. My potatoes have been bigger. That's what I've noticed. But of course, the SSPC 2024 Single Seed Potato Challenge, is where we are really going to find the results out. So we've got 5 minutes to go. What are we going to do next week? We've already decided the mission. It's going to be make a meal or cook something from stuff that we've harvested from the plot. That's not going to be a problem. Cabbages, cauliflowers, broccoli, potatoes, fruit. I've got plenty of things that we could use. So lots of options there. What seed shall we sow next week? Any ideas? And is there any subjects that you would like us to discuss next week? I've got to say, I think this subject this week's been really good to get everyone discussing their thoughts and sharing their ideas. And I really like these ones where we can really get into a subject and get everyone sharing ideas and thoughts. Turbo Stream says, I was banned from watching the footy at work years ago. I didn't mind as I'm not interested in it, so win-win, LOL. I don't really watch football. I'm glad we got to the finals. I hope we win, but I feel if I watch it, we're gonna lose. So I'm not gonna watch it just to do that. Digwell says had to do a trial with only a few buckets, but that's as far as it. Oh, SSPC. So many dropped out or not posted the planting videos. Only 30 left in it now from 60 plus. I have to admit, I haven't done a planting video. Apologies. You know, I did, but you remember my server crashed. Well, I lost it all, which is still being repaired. I lost it all on that, so I'm hoping it's going to come back so I can put it all together and show you what we've done. Apologies, but I'm still growing them. I am still growing them, and they are looking awesome. I've got to say, I'm not going to say any more than that. They are looking good. Obviously, I haven't dug into the soil, but the foliage looked good. I was banned as every time I watched, they lost. Yep, I feel the same for that. Yeah, so what do we discuss next week? Any ideas? What do we discuss next week? I'm trying to think of any ideas. I tell you what, something I thought might be a good idea is talking about like an edible hedge, something we touched upon today. So, edible hedge or some sort of training trees and plants to form a hedge. Would that be a subject that interests anyone? Because it's definitely something that I've got a bit of interest in. Any thoughts on that? A couple of ideas have came in. Scott says types of mustard, Tatsu or Mizuna. Talking about for the sow along next week. Any thought or kale? We did kale at some point, didn't we? If I would sow your kale soon if you need to get it in. Yeah, get your kale if you want it to grow over winter done soon. So mustard or kale, I'll let you choose on that. Well, we've got Stuart Jackson says, thank you for another great live show. No problem. Digwell says it will be easy to detect any cheaters this year due to the variety I've chosen. Oh, intriguing. Intriguing. Scott says edible hedge sounds great. And Bally says, yes, sounds good. And Digwell says edible hedge for me. Fantastic. That's what we're going to talk next week. Edible hedge, something I would like to do. Now, you just got to decide mustard or kale for the sow along. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Nigel says, second sowing of leeks now. Really? Really? That's quite late. I very rarely sow after May, so I'll be intrigued how well that gets on for you. Digwell says mustard. So that's one vote, 2 votes for mustard. Growing around the edge of your plot sounds good. I think so. I really want to do more of this. Digwell says mustard. Ballysin says mustard. Looks like it's going to be mustard. Sorry for the kale turbo stream. Remember, we can always suggest it next week. Kale, the food of the devil himself. I'm happy with mustard too. I will remember to show you the updates from the seeds that we've sown in the last few weeks as well, because I keep meaning to do that. I keep taking photos of them, but everything just becomes a bit of a blur. Well, guys, it's time to wrap this one up. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Been absolutely fantastic to chat to you. As always, been a really good conversation. I hope we have helped anybody who is interested in starting a new allotment or got a new allotment. And of course, if you are watching this video in the future, it might help you out along in the future. Right, guys. I completely lost my train of thought there. Apologies. What it was I saw this come up. Always do a sowing now. Misses a second round of allium leaf miner and harvest in March. I'm going to sow some leek seeds now. You said that as well. Right. I'm going to wrap this one up. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. Thanks so much for sharing your tips. Good luck to England this evening. If you're watching the football, hope you have a good time. Fingers crossed we will win. I haven't set myself up to go. We will be back again next Sunday at 6, where we're going to do it all again. We're going to be talking about edible hedges, things like sowing mustard, and we are going to be, excuse me, cooking something from the allotment. Take care, guys. See you again next